Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the show. My name's Skaggle Bones. Back with another bike video for you today. Today we're going to be talking about the mountain bike. Yes, it's been a while. I know it's been a number of months, about 5 months or so, since I have made a video for you guys. I apologize for that. I have been out and away. As most of you know, I'm in the Navy, and that just means that I'm not always available to make videos for you guys. So now that I'm back, I decided to try to pump out a couple videos for you guys, hopefully, and give you a few more reviews, some long-term reviews. So I want to talk about the mountain bike because we did a few extra upgrades. As you can see, the difference from before is our brake levers have changed a little bit. Before we had those silver brake levers when we did the build video. They're mechanical disc. And now we have, as you can see down there at the bottom, we have some hydraulic disc brakes. Okay. And then I'm going to talk to you why I've used the brakes that I have used here. These are the Elixer3s from Avid Sram brakes. There have been some on and off complaints about these brakes as far as reliability. They're some of the best brakes as far as modulation is concerned, but they have had some reliability issues. But I will show you in a later video the upgrade that we did to these to make them so that they are not a reliability issue. And there are a few upgrades that you can do to these. Okay, but excellent brakes. And then, as you can see, we have this is the old bar and stem that we did for the build. Stem is kind of thin. This is the only thing they had available at the time, as well as this Cannondale bar, which it's a lot wider than my original bar, but still only 690 millimeters. I want something a little bit bigger, and this one here is a 740 millimeter. So put on this Contact SL, both bar and stem SL, super light. The next one is SLR, which stand for their carbon fiber. So this is the lighter of the aluminum, and it's quite a bit thinner. If I was to show you the end of the bar, this bar is actually quite thick as far as aluminum wise is concerned. This one is quite a bit thinner. In fact, my bar ends that I had didn't quite fit in there, so I had to use some road bike ones, because it's more of a road bike size hole in there in these bars. Other than that, everything else fit fine. Also, what this allowed me to do, as you can see here, compared to, well, what I had before is these brakes and levers, in order for me to get so that I could have a one-finger grip on the brakes, this had to be all the way over here. So I really like it, so that's why I went to it. Obviously, we got the beefier stem. It's a little bit more rise than I normally would go with, but since I want this to be a little bit more comfort, that's fine. It's the same shortness. They make even a shorter one, which comes to about here. That comes back a little farther, even farther of the stem, but this one is pretty good. So this is kind of the way I like my setup to be. Okay, as you can see there, I changed out my saddle. Originally, I had the Bontrager saddle on there, the size specific. So you can see that's my size yellow. It's kind of in between size. They have 3 or 4 different sizes of these for different sit bones, and you get fitted for these saddles back when I was in Virginia, and it's a good saddle, but it's got the chromoly rails. It's not the lightest of saddles. Does the job, gets the trick done. Not a super expensive saddle. I think it's only like $60–70, but it is a good, reliable saddle, and we're gonna still keep this. Probably throw it on my son's bike, but I wanted to switch over to a slightly more comfortable saddle for myself. This is a Blackburn. Let's see, what style is this here? Look, Ligera. Okay. Now they claim that this can be used for either road or mountain biking. I think it's more probably of a road saddle, but I really like it. It's extremely comfortable for mountain biking. It's got the titanium rails. It just, for me, the way I sit on the bike, and since the seat says to sit down all the way, and this is a larger frame bike, I sit up a little higher on this bike. I wanted a saddle that's a little flatter for myself. Okay, And I like kind of the color scheme, how it goes with everything. So worked out pretty good. So like I said, the major difference was I was riding mechanical brakes. They just kind of broke down on me. They just stopped working. So mechanical brakes, you have a cable that comes down and pulls and actually pulls a kind of a piston up, which pushes one of the pads in. And the problem is that little armature that spins up on some of those old Tektro brakes, when the arm would spin up, it actually has this spring inside of it to allow it to snap back, and that spring they tend to break. And the problem is you can't replace those springs. You can't get new ones. You can't order them. They're just kind of throwaway brakes. So pretty much we had to throw them away. A couple little extra things we did here as well. We do have a K-edge mount up here. I have it spun down for the moment, so if I do want to put on one of my cycling computers, I can. Right now, kind of just using this as a spacer for right now. So we have that there. Okay. Other than that, setup is very simple. It was very easy to change out these brakes. They are split bolt, so they have 2 bolts on there, so you can take this. As you can see, we have a little bit of a gap here, and that's because some people have the blade for the brake all the way over here, right at the beginning. But that's because they put their hands farther this way on the bars. As you can see, I have a pretty decent sized hand, and I mean, my hands are pretty big. I don't consider myself to have small hands, and even if my hands were here, if you notice, I have the blades out as far as they will go, and that's as far down as it comes before they engage. So I could in theory have my fingers all the way under, and those brake levers are not, see, so you can see I probably got about 8 millimeters before they actually hit my fingers. So I have no risk of crushing my fingers or even impeding the braking performance by my fingers. But since I keep my hands kind of near the edge, not over the red part here, not over that piece, I kind of keep it right here. As you can see, there's 2 patterns of grip here. And I kind of keep my hands right there at the edge, and then allow this blade. Some people like to do this, and that leaves this finger for shifting, and then this finger for shifting. Some people like to do that with the middle finger. If you do that, you just have to make sure that, and I would move these probably over a little farther so that your finger is right in that little notch there. That's kind of why you have that little notch there. But you don't really need to, because this is two-way, or what they call two-way release. So what happens is I shift up this way with this lever here, and then this lever I can either pull on it to release it or push to release it. So either way it's going to work. So I can do that or I can do that. Okay, so that's how that works. Same thing on that side. So as you can see, I'll put my other hand over here. As you can see, I got my hand right there, right on the edge where I kind of like it, and that gets your arms out as far as they can go on the bars. So as you can see here, we have a nice beefy stem. Nice thing I like about this stem that Giant does is it is made for their overdrive steerers. So if you have the 1.5-inch steer tube, this will fit it. But it does have, when you take what you do is you take the bolts out, and then, but this is an 1.125-inch steer tube. So you're like, well, if this is for an overdrive steer tube, how do you get that to fit on there? Well, it has a spacer in there, and it's a nice aluminum spacer. So if you want to use this on an overdrive steer tube, this stem, you just take the bolts out. This the spacer comes out. You put that aside, and then you put this on the overdrive steer. Nice thing is, it also comes with the top cap and a nice bolt that won't rust on you. None of these bolts are going to rust on you because they're stainless steel, so they shouldn't rust on you. Some of them you can get when you get the SLR. They're going to come with the titanium bolts. So actually, yeah. So this isn't a titanium bolt here, but they don't rust. I've had them on my road bike, the same, pretty much the same stem, same top cap, and they absolutely are great. So really love it. These contact bar and stems are just absolutely phenomenal. Granted, I know this is not a, it's a Diamondback frame, but as you can see here, I have some giant wheels, front and rear. That was really all that was available for me to go out to the store and buy. I know this is 26 inches. You know, I know I could have bought a different fork and got some 27-inch, 27.5 wheels. The back will support 27.5. I've tried it before. The dropouts work good for it, but I just didn't really want to make that move at the time. So I got these wheels. I was able to retain my old tires, obviously, that you guys saw from the build video. And of course, we still have the same group set. So we still have the Olivio 9-speed group set with the 3 in the front and the 9 in the back. That is still the same. We haven't changed anything out there with that group set. My intention is to possibly buy a bigger cassette and turn this, buy a like a 10 to 42 cassette in the back and turn this into a 2x system. And that would make it just probably a little bit better. So that's my plans for this bike. I really like the bike. It's been a good bike as far as being able to do a fresh build off of it. Like I said, one of the main things that is the problem with these brakes that people have seen, and it's not so much, well, so Avid came out. Avid is a SRAM brand. The same thing that Shimano has a number of different companies, and let's see, a number, Bontrager is part of Trek and things like that. So SRAM owns a number of different companies. They own RockShox, they own Avid, and Avid is their brake brand. So years and years ago, Avid produced a brake called the Juicy, which was some of the best modulating hydraulic disc brakes on the market. And they're extremely reliable. They worked really well. And then they came up with a new brake system, and they just improved on it a little bit, made it a little bit better modulation, but they wanted to make it a more simple system that really didn't need to be bled that much. So they came up with the Elixir. The problem was, in theory, it was supposed to work phenomenal, but it really didn't. So the dot fluid that they use, and one thing you should know, that all SRAM products, I'm going to take a seat here, folks. All SRAM brakes use .40 and 5.1 fluid. Okay, I'm going to try to zoom in here. Sorry about the view there. I'll let you other stuff done. I'm going to try to zoom in here. If we can see that here. .5.1 and .4 only. Okay. The Shimano brakes use mineral oil. Now, mineral oil does not expand or contract. It is less prone to air bubbles. The problem is the modulation isn't that great with the Shimano brakes. They don't tend to be as good. So, and what we talk about by modulation is that when you put on this brake, it doesn't just clamp down and stop the tire from moving. Okay, so most hydraulic brakes, when you do this, the tire stops moving, and as you can see here that I'm doing now, the tire stops moving and it literally locks the wheel out. Okay, so you kind of skid around. Well, SRAM really don't do that. Now here, by my just putting a little bit of pressure on, if I put pressure on the wheel, it will spin in the brakes. It's kind of hard to do. It's kind of hard to do on video camera here. If I can actually show you here. Okay. So as you can see, I'm spinning this wheel. I'm kind of moving it just a little bit, not a lot. And I have a lot of pressure on this brake, okay? So that's modulation. It's kind of like anti-lock disc brakes. Anti-lock disc brakes on your car, they cause the caliper to move in and out and actually modulate back and forth so that your disc rotors and brakes don't lock up on you and you don't skid. Okay, it's less of a problem when you're mountain biking because you're on kind of rough stony surfaces and you're going to skid anyways. But you really don't want that to happen. So really good modulation means that as you press on the brake, and the interesting thing is about SRAM is a lot of brakes, when you press on the brakes and they begin to engage, you have very little power at the beginning right here. It isn't until you really clamp down on the brake they really start to get their power. So most brake companies are spongy kind of at the beginning, and then the more you clamp down on them, the tighter they get, okay? And that can be adjusted a little bit to some extent, but not the same way like cable brakes can, okay? Whereas Avids are the opposite. So what Avid does is most of your brake power is at the beginning, and then the more you clamp down, they then modulate more and more. So it's most of your level is right at the beginning, and then it gets softer as the more you clamp down on them. Now you can adjust that in and out depending on how much fluid you have in the system and things like that. You can kind of adjust that. Okay, so like I said, the Juicy were the originals that were just phenomenal at it. They're some of the best brakes on the market. They come out with the Elixir. Everybody bought them up. They thought, oh, they're going to be great. They had Elixir 1, 2, 3, all the way through Elixir 7. And it was just different price range of Elixirs. And people just started having problems with them. They would be out on the trails, and within a couple weeks, the brakes would start to lock up on them. They need to be bled, all kinds of problems. And these brakes, unlike, let me show you something. As you notice here, there is no system where I can take a cap off, pour more fluid in it, and plug that system back up. There's no system that has a cap and a diaphragm so that when fluid expands and contracts, that this diaphragm expands and contracts and allows for the fluid to displace itself in the brake system. So what happens is when the fluid expands, it has no place to go but into the caliper, okay? And so it's going to cause your brakes to clamp down, okay? And that's kind of the problem with these Elixirs. That's what they did, is they have a master cylinder and all the fluid is contained within the master cylinder, okay? So that's kind of the problem these had. In fact, I'm going to try to pop this off while I'm holding the camera. There we go. I'm going to do it on that side. So you have this little cover here. As you can see, you can change out the hose quite easily, but you have this little tiny screw, and you take out that screw and you put your bleed device in. So anytime you need to change out the fluid, you have to use a bleed system. You can't just pour new fluid in and suck the old fluid out with the syringe out of the bottom. So you can't do that. You're going to have to use a bleed system and pull out fluid while you're pushing in new fluid. So the whole point was that on a monthly basis you would do a bleed with this and just pull out any of the gunky fluid while still keeping a majority of the fluid, and you didn't have to do a full bleed every single time. You just do like what they call micro bleed. Well, also there's a system where you can take the cap off and just do this and burp any air out of it, and you don't actually have to bleed brakes. You just kind of burp them. It overflows a little bit, you top it off, and then you put your top back on, and then you're good to go. You can't really do this with the Elixirs. Now, the other problem that they had is inside of here, the master cylinder piston, it was made of plastic. So I bought these brakes. I knew kind of what was wrong with them, what could be wrong with them. By the way, these retail for $175 a piece. That's how expensive the Elixirs ran. So $175 a piece. I got them for $230 for the pair with the rotors. And so I bought them. I have a buddy of mine that are very familiar with the Avid brakes, and he's done some work with them. I mean, quite a bit of rework on these brakes. So he's very familiar with them, and he got himself, he had an update kit for these Elixir 3s, which he knew a guy who had machined, actually worked for Avid at one point, who had machined these new master cylinders for him, and he would sell them, and they're aluminum instead of the ones that are in here are Teflon and plastic. And the reason they recommend the dot fluids that they recommend, the dot 4s and the dot 5.0, is because there is another type of fluid that you can get. Okay, there is a fluid that you can get that will not expand or contract with heat or cold. The interesting thing is the fluid runs at a higher temperature. In fact, you pour it out of a bottle and it will actually burn your hands. It's this very acidic type of fluid. The problem is it would eat away at the master cylinder. So they're very specific about that you have to use this very specific fluid or it's going to eat away the seals, it's going to eat away everything. So the interesting thing is one of the guys that worked for Avid, he built some replacement master cylinders for these guys, and I got a hold of them, and I got a hold of a kit, and I did a complete rebuild of these themselves. Now I'm going to try to do at some point maybe a video for you guys, but there, like I said, there is a fix. Now these have been known to work in a lot of different places, and in certain areas these aren't a problem. The problem is when these were put to real heavy use. So like when guys were using it for downhill racing where they're using the brakes a lot and they're really boiling their brakes up. So that's where these brakes were not as efficient as some other brakes out there on the market, especially the Juicies. Okay, here in Guam, temperatures are extremely warm, and these tend to heat up quite a bit, and people have been on the trails, and it's pretty much SRAM brakes overall, just because dot fluid tends to expand quite a bit in the heat. Not so much when the fluid itself heats up, it's just the heat itself tends to expand the dot fluid up in these type of cables, and because these aren't steel cables, obviously it heats them up, and the fluid expands, and it just expands more than the master cylinders or the calipers can really handle, and they lock up. They tend to lock up, so you got to bleed them off, and they're not the greatest of brakes, especially for hot weather areas. Okay, but I really like the modulation of them. I wanted these brakes, so that's what I did. So, like I said, my buddy helped me rebuild these. In fact, if you look in here, there's a couple of screws. You have an adjustment screw here for length, and you have this Phillips head screw, and that allows the blade to come off. You bleed these out, and the blade comes off, and it comes off the cylinder, and then you unscrew the cylinder out of there. The cylinder itself, it screws itself in. You bleed them off, you pull the whole thing apart, and then you can put a new cylinder in there. And that's kind of the interesting thing, is these are very easily they're easy to fix. It's maybe, if you go and buy those parts, it's maybe $20. So now a lot of people don't want to do that. They don't want to buy brakes to fiddle with them and rebuild them and make them better. So for most people, that's not what you want to do, but that was the choice I had. I had that, or try to order some, or I was going to go with Shimano and be like, I got to live with, I'm not going to have the modulation I want for some of the riding I do, and this is what I wanted. So this is what I went with, and that's what I did. Like I said, most people aren't going to do that. It's not a big deal. A lot of these brakes, the Avid brakes, they work in all kinds of different places. In Guam, they're just trouble. So, like I said, one of the guys I talked to at the bike shop I work with, he's gonna try that. He's gonna try looking it up and see if he can do the same thing for his Juicies and his Elixirs as well. See if he can get his working out here as well. So, like I said, I know this video went a little long, but I just kind of wanted to show you some of the stuff that we had done, some of the changes. Here's an actual closer look up the calipers, as you can see. There you go. They're really nice, easy to change out like any of your calipers. Let's see. Good right there. This actually has a pin on the other side. Spinning around. Woo! Sorry guys. I got caught up in my cord. See if I can focus in here. Yeah, probably not. So there's, what this is the nice thing about these is this is a screw instead of being like a cotter pin. So you have a little locking pin here, a little locking clamp that pulls off, and then it doesn't thread in this side, it threads through this side. So you don't want to break these ever, these bolts. They're very specific. So you take that pin off, it actually will rotate all the way around, just pull the pin off, you unthread this bolt out, it'll come out, and then you just pull the brake pads off. And they're on a spring like any other brake pads. Of course you have your bleeding port here for bleeding the brakes. And then as you can see you have a couple different washers in here. A standard washer, you have a flat, it's flat, this inner washer here is flat on one side, concave, rounded, and then this is the opposite. It's flat on this farthest side of the bolt, and then it curves in. And so what it actually allows you to do is you can actually take these brakes and kind of, they can be rotated, moved back and forth like this. So the nice thing is when these brakes, when you apply pressure to them, when you loosen these both bolts up, you apply the pressure to them with the handles like that, just kind of apply some pressure on the brake itself and then tighten them back up. As you can see, these are kind of curved a little bit. It's because those disc rotors are perfectly centered in here. So that's the nice thing about these brake calipers. They really are great for setting up. I really like the system that they do. Avid uses that the same in all their stuff, all their brakes. So as you can see, the brake length, the hose length was perfect. I didn't have to cut anything. Hose came right up, came right under where the other mechanical brakes were. Brake line right here comes right up, came over. This one comes down and around. Like I said, you always want to come through the center, never go around on the outside. You'll get caught on stuff. Trust me, these will never get caught on your spokes or your wheels. And then what I did is these here are, let's see, try to look here. These here are the centerpieces that came in the brakes, and I kind of keep them with me in case I ever need them, in case I have to take the wheel off and I work on my brakes while I'm in the field. I'm going to just pop those in between the pads so that I don't collapse the pistons on themselves. Makes it a little bit easier, but I use them kind of to keep my brake lines, just kind of tie those together, and they can slide up and down, and it keeps my brake lines all nice and together and good. So hopefully you guys liked this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Make sure you guys subscribe. There's a subscribe button on the video here that I always put up for you guys, so that you guys can subscribe. Makes it easy for you guys. Like always, keep riding.